Hi, everyone. We have a wonderful show for you today. I have the deepest respect for David St. John and James Cushing. They are both original poets who have made significant contributions to the poetry form. David will read first. David St. John is the author of 12 collections of poetry, most recently, The Last Troubadour, New and Selected Poems. He is chair of English at the University of Southern California and a chancellor of the Academy of American Poets. Here's a magnificent poet, David St. John.
Let me say first how thrilled I am to be here with Harry and Jim. And I decided that unlike Jim, who has a fabulous new book, I don't have a fabulous new book. So I'm going to read some older poems. And I'm going to read from some limited edition books. And the first book I'm going to read from is called In the Pines. And it has as a sort of subtitle, they're called Lost Poems 1972 to 1997. And the first of these poems that I'm going to read is a story, a kind of an invention, a kind of fable about the great 8th century Chinese poet Li Po. It's also, for me, a kind of ars poetica about the things that I value in poetry. And this poem it's a little long, so kick back, pour a drink, get ready. And it's called The Dragon in the Lake. When Li Po was a child, he was scolded constantly by his father for, not telling lies exactly, but for exaggerating in beautiful but disturbing ways. For example, if a butterfly landed in the plum tree outside his window, Li Po would run to his father, calling out, "The double lips of Buddha are praying in my tree." If his mother dropped a handful of rice onto the packed dirt walkway of the garden, Li Po would look up at the clouds and wail, "The seeds of the universe have scattered across my life." As you might imagine, this habit annoyed his family. So one day, an uncle took Li Po on a walk to cure him once and for all. When Li Po asked where they were going, his uncle pointed to the trail leading up the mountain. And he said, "There, to see the grandfather." Li Po had often heard his family speak with reverence of the grandfather who had, Li Po knew, the strength of 7 rivers and the wisdom of the 11 ancient masters. Li Po was silent for the first hour of the climb. But when he saw a lizard, a familiar chameleon, leap from a branch to a rock, he couldn't restrain himself. "Uncle, the blessings of the nether world have passed before me." The uncle said, "Nonsense, Li Po. That's simply a chameleon. Invisibility in lizards means nothing." Li Po was discouraged. If it were true that invisible lizards meant nothing, then what could really matter anymore? Lipo and his uncle climbed up through the dusk and on into the night. Suddenly, as they reached a bend in the trail, a meteor shower painted the sky, and Lipo fell to his knees, proclaiming to the pines, "The jewels of the unforgiven have burst like blisters in the sky. Oh, the shimmering curtain of the final veil." His uncle turned to him, saying, "Really now, Lipo, the chips of astral systems frequently visit our province. Only a superstitious peasant makes any real note of them." And Lipo began to wonder if his heart had again misled him. In silence, they walked on, climbing and climbing all through the night. Just before daybreak, Lipo and his uncle came to the mouth of a small cave carved into the mountain. Before it, there was a shrine and pine needles burning. The grandfather stepped out to greet them. Before either Lipo or his uncle could say a word, the old man pointed behind them. They turned and saw below, in the distance, the most beautiful lake, black as obsidian, glistening. And as they watched, it began changing into the colors of a ripening peach, red flames, yellow streamers, blazing ripples. And it seemed to be shaking as it filled with a light from below the earth, a volcanic, seething light, answering the distant red planet pushing at the lip of the horizon. And the grandfather put his hand on Lipo's shoulder, asking, "Do you know what that is, my son?" But before Lipo could answer, his uncle broke in, saying, "Just a sunrise on a summer's day." The grandfather looked at him, shaking his head, gazing out across the lake. He turned again to Lipo and said, "Only a man without a spirit doesn't know the creature who stirs in that water, burning each day to rise into the world, to shed the silk waters that are the walls of its cocoon, to strip itself of its robe of scales. Only a man who has no future in the life of pure light doesn't sit each morning waiting to welcome the return of its kingdom." With that, the grandfather stepped back into his cave. Lipo's uncle was white as birch ash. He said, "Lipo, tell me, what is it that's there?" And Lipo smiled, able at last to say what he had known in his heart all along. "There, Uncle," Lipo said, "lives my protector and my single song." The poems in this book come from a period of time when my life was changing. I was moving from California, where I'd grown up, to the Midwest. And as As it happened, there were many changes also going on in my life. This poem is just called California. And it has as its epigraph just a phrase from Bo Diddley, "Who do you love?" My last night in California, she got up from the broken bed, standing naked a moment, pulling on her boots, only her boots, with their stiletto toes and lizard skins, before pulling back the drapes that covered the dusty window of our small room in the old stucco motel. The window, a floor-to-ceiling checkerboard of opaque and clear panes. She looked out at the trucks passing in the rain down the old section of Highway 99. The rainbows of the spilled oil and neon mixing on the rain-glazed asphalt of the parking lot. Maybe she was thinking of a moon in the teeth of the Sierras, a moon setting in the mountains beyond her father's ranch, where it would be clear above these storm clouds. Maybe of her husband just getting up to the late news and his shift at the mill. But as I reached by the bed to the low table where I'd thrown my watch, and before I could say, "Come here, don't worry," or any dozen stupid things, she began to rock slowly back on the heel of one boot, snapping out the other like a whip, kicking out one by one the small square panes of the window, each echoing ricochet of glass, louder than the drone of the trucks outside, as the lights of the room next door flashed on a moment, their sudden glare hitting the windshields of the cars nosed up in front of every door. I grabbed her around the waist and pulled her back onto the bed, her fingernails slicing the whole length of my cheek, 3 long parallel lids of skin opening as the blood ran down onto my chest. I held her until the lights next door went off, as the sound of the rain, the trucks, and the night grew. Now, when I go back to California, I don't ask where she is or why. I only know it wasn't the risk that kept us meeting in motels, in the bars of Chinese restaurants. It was simply the desire to be desired. The lie, the good lie told softly in the dark each night, to keep believing you're lucky, more lucky than most, that if the world holds many dreams, at least one of them holds you. And this is a poem that takes its title from the great Lieber and Stoller song, Benny King's song, "Stand By Me." When the solace of angels is named, when the winds blister the academy, when the first lesions of winter light scrawl their paths across the black sheet of the bed beneath the skylight, when the algebras of my past repeat themselves drunkenly on into the night, when the lemon peels twist at the edge of the porcelain saucer, when the door is closed behind me, when the stilettos all stand at attention the moment I step onto the subway, when my future's looking dim, stand by me. No matter the declensions of light along the shore, no matter the new color of my hair, no matter the tattoo I've solicited in a bar fight over nothing, no matter the earrings on the dresser top, no matter the motion of my body against yours, breaking its own rainbow, no matter what, stand by me. If some innocent misanthropy unties me from my new suede shoes, if the many travelers within me all depart together, or if the one who's most rude and surly returns to you alone, if every word I've lifted with such effort hangs in its residue of ash, if there's still some consequence in this, stand by me. After the music rasps its way out of my chambered bones, after the shuffle I'm famous for is reduced to nothing but the white tracings of shoes on a sidewalk numbered 1, 2, and 3, after the legato which will leave me alone, after the third day of prolonged applause, after the newscasters impress upon me the transitory nature of all earthly fame, after my makeup begins to run like stigmata in the shadow of the Klieg lights, after the night before the night you decide it really isn't worth it anymore, stand by me. Because the antipathy of my conscience has become quite enough. Because you remember me believing whatever it was that I believed. Because it's getting late, no matter which country, heart, or clock we consult. Because the outfield is moving in. Because even the women on the Pirelli calendar are looking grim. Because everyone has to forgive someone. Because I miss you. And it matters. Because no one else wears the mourning quite so wild. Stand by me. Please. Stand by me. So I'm going to read some poems from a book called Terraces of Rain. And some of the poems in this book have been collected in books of my selected poems. But I want to read some of the poems that were not. And this is called Vespers, the Balcony. I should say that Terraces of Rain is a book of poems set against Italian landscapes. Vespers, the Balcony. All of the poems have to do with couples in different phases. They held to the rhythms of the day in a style less frequent than imagined. She is tearing away the soft pop rind of the orange when the light across the bakery windows shivered a little with the clouds, though that was just the simple signal of the weather being pleased with itself. The orange was one whose blood had mellowed, had mottled on the rind, a soft leaf of rust, not to be confused with the real passage of time and other things. She looked down onto the city. Listen, she said, and the weight of the air shifted. A vine less strung than they'd first supposed dangled at the worn edge of the railing. Below, as the light ribboned the hills, the last monks walked deliberately from their cloisters, and the one she used to wave at looked up just as he turned the final corner of the gardens, heading to the chapel for Vespers. You see, she said, you see. And this is called From a Daybook. And that last poem was in the city of Verona. This is a poem from Ravenna, from a daybook. The musk of the cemetery was like music to the birds who smelled it from miles away. Its call, the spiked caskets of the fallen chestnuts, split and open on the paths between the stones, the tombs. And all in all, the present was a little hymn to be joined in with. And that was the simple goodness he supposed that they would be allowed, as sparrows settled around them like ash or leaves, like silent snow. All the tombs in the world share this. You knock. None of the living answer. I think I'll read just one or two poems and more poems. And these are from a limited edition book called The Window. And the title poem is after a photograph by the great Los Angeles photographer and himself a lover of poetry, James Welling. And the cover of the book has James Welling's photograph that the poem is after on its cover. He's a fabulous photographer. If you don't know him, please look up his work. And this will be the last poem that I read. The Window. You could be anywhere, almost anywhere at all, in almost any city and almost any abandoned life. But you are here, standing again outside the house where she lived, looking up at her third-floor apartment with its square corner tower and narrow windows, where you'd sit at night, reading at a small table while she painted her huge, savage canvases. In the bare, white living room she'd cluttered with drop sheets, buckets and brushes, scattered tubes of oils. Sex always smelled like espresso mixed with turpentine, like night blooming jasmine and Coltrane. Of course, you could be anywhere, but you were here, not even knowing if she's still living there. It's been so many years now since you walked out on her and left for the trenches of Manhattan. A shadow steps first into and then out of the light. The soft, brilliant rectangles of light framed by those corner windows. And then there's nothing except your emptiness and the shadow that might or might not have been hers. You could be anywhere. You could be home.
Thank you, David, for such a fabulous reading. I love your narrative strength, your vividness, your clarity, your illumination, and you just you make us all feel such at home. It's such an honor to have you read your poetry for us. We have about 2 minutes. I would just like to ask you maybe a dual question. When did you write your first poem? And then in your poem, California, where did you move to in the Midwest? Could you just give us a kind of a brief outline?
Sure. You know, the first real poems were probably in junior high school. I mean, I started playing folk music. It was, you know, the mid 60s. And so my influences were all of the kind of wonderful, not just Dylan, but the whole history of traditional folk music. And all of my work is about song. Everything I do comes out of music. And for me, that's what it's all about. I moved first to Iowa, then to Ohio, where I taught, and I kept moving east. I moved to Baltimore, where I lived for 10 years, where I taught. And then I moved back to California in 1987. And here I am.
Well, we're lucky to have you here in Los Angeles. And one last quick question. Where did you go to college?
I went to school in the San Joaquin Valley at Fresno State, where my teacher was Phil Levine. And my closest friend was the poet Larry Levis. And he became my closest friend in and out of poetry until he died at the age of 49. And I miss him every day.
Fresno has a great tradition. You're among them. And the two people you mentioned, among others, are also great. So thank you very much for blessing us with your wonderful poetry, Dave. It's a real pleasure.
Well, it's great to be here, and I can't wait to hear Jim.
James Cushing, retired in 2020 after teaching literature and creative writing for 35 years in San Luis Obispo, California, where he was a Communities Poet Laureate 2008 to 2010. While finishing a PhD at UC Irvine in the early 80s, he hosted a poetry radio program on KPFK FM in Los Angeles, giving early exposure to Wanda Coleman, Dennis Cooper, and Amy Gersler, among others. Cushing's most recent poetry collections include The Magician's Union, Solace, and Tangled Hologram, a luminous book, all from Cahuenga Press in Los Angeles. He lives in Hollywood with poet-painter Celeste Goyer, with whom he frequently collaborates. His daughter is the New York-based poet Iris Cushing. Here's a brilliant poet, Jim Cushing.
Thank you so much, Harry. Thank you, David. Thank you, Jennifer. Am I audible and visible and everything is all
Yep.
Good. Okay. David, thank you for sharing those remarkable, unusual poems of yours with us. The one in particular was a real journey. It was an honor to hear it. And Harry, thank you again so much for hosting this weekly event with such commitment and such elan. You're one of the models for the poetry community. As Harry and David both mentioned, I have a new book called Tangled Hologram from Cahuenga Press, and I'm going to be reading from that this afternoon. It's available from small press distribution. It's available from Cahuenga Press directly, and you can also get it through me at jamescushingpoetry.com. If you go to that, there's a little way you can order it, and if you order it from me, I'll give you a little present in the package. The poems in Tangled Hologram were written between January 2017 and June 2018, so none of them addresses the COVID pandemic, but most of them are written in free verse, by which I mean no, not using any pre-existing literary form. But I'd like to begin my reading with a poem that is an exception to that rule, a poem written in the form of a pantoum, which is one of my favorite literary forms. And it has to do not with the repetition of sounds, as in a rhyme, or the repetition of the beginning of a sentence, as David's very, very beautiful poem "Stand By Me" made use of, but of repetition of entire lines, so that you get the sense that you're going forward and backward at the same time. The poem's subject is one of my favorite movies, The Postman Always Rings Twice, starring Lana Turner and John Garfield. And I happen to be friends with the director Tay Garnett's daughter Tila, and poet David Trinidad suggested that I write a poem about my fondness for this movie. So rather than call the poem "The Postman Always Rings Twice," which I'm sure I will refer to it as, this is simply called "For David Trinidad and Tila Garnett." In Tay Garnett's "The Postman Always Rings Twice," Lana Turner first appears in pure white high-waist shorts, so tight in the crotch that the folds of fabric clearly model her vagina, and she simply stands there as John Garfield's ground beef patty sizzles and burns on a grill. Lana first appears in pure white high-waist shorts, so tight in the crotch that the moment almost takes wings and flies out of the movie. John Garfield lets his ground beef patty sizzle and burn on a grill. This meat is hot. Get it? Her virgin white is an act of camouflage. The moment almost takes wings and flies out of the movie. One thing only can equal that sexual power, the promise of murder. That meets even hotter. We get that her virgin white's an act of camouflage. From that moment on, we want them to kill her fuddy-duddy husband. One thing only can equal Lana's sexual power, the promise of murder. The husband's as wrong for Lana as the donkey was for Titania. And from his first moment, we want them to kill the old fuddy-duddy. He's a type, rural, simple-minded, oblivious, stingy, and a drunk. Every bit as wrong for Lana as the donkey was for Titania. Their first murder plot involves a bathtub and an electrical appliance. They know his type, rural, simple-minded, oblivious, stingy, and a drunk. So they and we figure he'll be easy to bump off. But a cat interferes. Their first murder plot involves a bathtub and an electrical appliance, but a cop and the DA suddenly show up and notice the getaway ladder, so they and we figure this won't be an easy bump off. When a cat interferes, the plot gets more psychological. Their shared guilt beckons to them. When a cop and the DA suddenly show up and notice the getaway ladder, a dark pool of doom opens up around Lana and John, an ocean of lust and hate. The plot gets more psychological. Their shared guilt beckons to them, and they kill the old man because they need a crime to relieve their tension. A dark pool of doom opens up around Lana and John, an ocean of lust and hate. They run into near the end of the picture, she in her tight white bathing suit. They killed the old man because they needed a crime to relieve their tension. And their last kiss leads with insolent ease to her violent death at the pole they run into near the end of the picture. She's in her tight white bathing suit. The folds of fabric clearly model her vagina. And she simply lies there, their last kiss having led with insolent ease to her violent death near a pole. In Tay Garnett's The Postman Always Rings Twice, starring Lana Turner. The next poems are more dreamlike, I suppose, would be a fair way to describe them. This one is called "The Woods Have Been Listening to Us." I held a set of jingle bells in my left hand and a brand new pencil in my right. A plea in the form of a marine layer filled the evening along with my bells. I had promised to teach these children, standing here with their hands on each other's crotches. But I looked down at their exquisitely knotted blonde locks and said thanks to the forbidden thoughts that had started peeking over the hill, adding uneasy music to the swollen branches of shade trees. Fog tucked the sun into bed. Self, you're a delusion I have filled with worms, but I remember kissing you long after forgetting the plot or names of the actors. And I will not quit you, though I know we both will die. Once again, these poems come from my collection, Tangled Hologram. Game of lamps This has nothing whatever to do with Game of Thrones. So don't worry about missing any obscure references. There aren't any. Game of Lamps. On the day we found out, we sat over coffee and pastry, and you said we were like tickets to a play that had not yet been written. We zeroed in on the mother tongue. Even crows were listening for the sounds of a long ride home. Our bodies were little masses of water, salted with the dust of men. Summer avoided the edges of memory, lasted no longer than winter. Doctors acted no more wisely than their patients. And we stumbled in tall grass that measured the autumn's puzzled orange momentum. A lot of flipping took place. We've dived into a swimming pool full of shirt buttons, scraping our ribs. We climbed out and saw white light all around us. Read continental philosophers late into school spring nights. When we finished our reading, everyone had melted for the summer. When they came back and faced up to us again, the whole arrangement had fallen into whack. Biggest chore is complete, the mist embraced. I ate every bite of my lunch and fell asleep under the spines of a palm tree. My knuckles sparkled and my hands fell asleep at the same time. I wasn't the youngest anymore. I was alone inside a monster with a circle placed around my mouth in such a way that you see only the artistic view and cannot speak to it because you have always just started to sneeze. This next piece is a prose poem, which is to say that it's written as a standard prose paragraph with the unit of meaning in the sentence rather than the line. Under the llama blanket. Our old house stands empty now, but even so, the corners of the upstairs bedrooms still give off a low hum. As I stand in front of the door, I participate in the chaos of whatever comes between thoughts. So my face won't simply aim forward at the door. I keep looking off to the left, where tree branches are altering their shapes, slowly but discernibly, into some sort of tableau left over from Civil War days. I suppose I have to fill out all the same detailed forms again before I'm allowed to enter the house, even though, as my angry mother was so fond of saying, I've become invisible. But behind the morphing trees, I glimpse a woman in her Sunday clothes, bending near a stream. I smell honey and vanilla. And in an intuitive flash, I realize a dangerous beast sleeps nearby. And the only object I have to defend us is a broken yellow crayon. I must put on jeans and long sleeves. The rescue bus has turned into a tango lesson, and the dancers are pulling simple Bronze Age style armor over their faces. I think I know what to do next, as long as I can get into my office building. The house, I mean. The second floor should be safe and dry. Is that why you asked me here? Quite often, I listen to music as I write, and I went through a period where I was listening to a great deal of the symphonies of Anton Bruckner. So this poem was set into motion after a Bruckner session, and the title of it is simply the composer's name, which is also the subject of the first sentence. Anton Bruckner has discovered that the organ is an orchestra with pitchfork people inside the pipes. No one can save him from this delusion. He flutters in a cloud of peppermint-scented steam and writes his Eighth Symphony. Concert halls through Europe fill up with honey-sweet laws, like zithers going up and down. He giggles and walks toward his rosary, away from his chutney collection. How I know this is, I'm a page from the Eighth, supine in my bed of leaves. Wisdom, whose name is woman, smolders next to me nightly. For hundreds of years, when darkness fell, ghosts moved beneath the earth, the better to ready her to reclaim the world we built on her. I imagine the whole of North America as an andante. Over a distant radio comes 1953, the year I will be reborn. The soloist beckons to my pregnant mother sitting in her love seat, listening. I'm a nimbus now, prepared to live down the straitjacket of my birthright. I italicize my nasturtiums so they look more important. The last full day, I found my jewelry box in the dark. The jewels had lit candles in their mouths. I found your jewelry box in a brightly lit room. Tried to tell you, but could only spit out wax and lamp black. You may not be 100% in the multiplication gardens, but I can't find my hands without your app. Now, take a look out at the night as it gathers force. Every letter connects with its mate, resulting in a new set of words that mean what we became and remain in the eyes of others. Look at our words divide over and over, like a man with a stutter spitting out parts of his name. We got ready for the solstice with Sappho, Blake, and Rambo, never complaining when our shoes became trophies and spiders co-opted our nectarines. But summer arrives as a lost piece of chalk, and we're blank chalkboards nobody wants to write on. In my case, they taught me 2 years of religion, then cuffed my praying hands behind my back. Everyone saw how badly I needed to use my phone. It's the situation, not the character. The situation has a phone, but no bank account. You get it. Let's see. I think I have time to read a couple of others. Yeah, I do. Again, thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you, Harry, for presenting this poetry shindig every Tuesday from 1 to 2. It's one of the oases in my week. One afternoon in our national memory, one priest begins to melt, his liquid staining the stone floor of the church beneath him. That choir, too, begins melting, the boys' fingerprints turning smooth as they begin to slide off their hands. One by one, pew by pew, it happens to the parish as the over 50s droop and drip, and one praying woman falls to her side like an immolating monk without flame or sidewalk. And soon the whole church is ankle deep in reading glasses, thrift store blouses, wingtips, hymnals, all stained and warm with bluish red goo that once was this whole congregation only a few minutes ago. What it meant, no one knew. I intend to stand in this breeze, holding my donut until an answer jumps a fence like a burning cloud of dust and lands dead at my feet. Let me close out, because I know that Harry always likes to involve his readers with some questions and some dialogue. So I think this would be a good one to end on, keeping an eye on the clock here. This is also a prose poem toward the end of the book, and I've had some good luck with this in public reading so far. This poem is called "Dream of Women." And Dream of Women. In my dream, Memphis Minnie stands near me, her face sore from laughing. Joan Didion, pale in a light green sundress, stands near her, looking anxious, but Minnie stifles a giggle anyway. Now Betty Davis and Joan Crawford, wearing their whatever happened to Baby Jane makeup and costumes, enter through the kitchen door, arguing, as they like to do. And a minute later, Marianne Moore peers in through the same door, her mother standing a few inches behind her. The poet shakes her head and walks away, headed toward, we imagine, the apartment she shares with the elderly lady. Patricia Highsmith comes out from the bathroom where she's been sewing up a rip in the crotch of her pantsuit while having a heart-to-heart with Elizabeth Bishop about the ups and downs of life in exile, France, Brazil. Who's that napping on the daybed? Louise Brooks, as I live and breathe. She's tired from a long week and had to rest a moment. She came with Betty Paige, who's reading a magazine over in the corner, guarding Louise's sleep, as she likes to say. The phone rings. Billie Holiday, lost, is asking me for the address. I give it to her. Carla Bley asks, "Is that Billie? I need to ask her something." And she takes the phone. I notice Virginia Woolf in the corner, listening intently to Rachel Maddow, while Dorothy Parker, seated nearby, looks down at her shoes and smokes. A bell rings several times, and the house lights flash. One of our favorites, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, has just arrived with a limo full of friends. Hillary Clinton, Joan Baez, Angela Davis, Janet Malcolm, Yoko Ono, Grace Kelly, Hedy Lamarr, Mary Shelley, Gertrude Stein, Myra Hess, Frida Kahlo, Nina Simone, Maxine Waters, Martha Argerich, Sally Ride, Margaret Sanger, Meredith Monk, Carole King, Agnes Martin, Chrissy Hind, Joni Mitchell, Ida Lupino, Simone de Beauvoir, Lauren Bacall, Beyonce, Shirley Chisholm, Exene Cervenka, Wanda Coleman, Jane Freilicher, and Nico. Yeah, this party's really rocking now. Good thing I live in a big enough place for all these people to mingle and eat and drink and sway back and forth with some good jazz. Man, this dream is turning into like a customized version of Desolation Row with all these characters. Now, look out the window. Just outside, in the cool air, talking, stand Emma Bovary, Anna Karenina, Odette and Albertine, Daisy Faye, Sabina and Teresa, stuttering Mary Lvov, elegant Mrs. Dalloway, clever Rosalind, scheming Lady Macbeth, sexy Circe, long-suffering Penelope. Sappho takes her Martin acoustic guitar out of its case and starts tuning up. Is it right or wrong to want to live inside this dream as long as I can?
It's right, Jim.
From my book Tangled Hologram, which is now available from better sources.
Well, thank you, Jim, for your sagacity, your imagination, the surreal way you write, the sense of humor, your love of literature and music, women. You make us all feel at home. I think we all agree with that last poem. You have such a great, knowledge. Both of you are scholars as well as poets, so it's really a rare occasion we have with both of you. Jim, we have about 3 or 4 minutes left.
Mm-hmm.
I know you moved to LA a couple of years ago, and I've noticed a sense of freedom in your poetry since you've been here. I know how much you've always loved LA. You used to drive up and down the coast. You were the Neil Cassidy of one from SLO to LA for many years. I don't know how you did it. Just 2 things I would just like you to address. Number one, your feelings about your writing since you've been in LA. And then secondly, what would you, I know you probably told this to young people many times, what would you say to a young poet? What would you say to her? What to focus on as she sits down to write her first poem?
Good Lord. In terms of what things have been like in Los Angeles, one of the things I love about Los Angeles is the sense that it is at some level inexhaustible. That no matter how quote well I come to know the city, unquote, there will always be some new neighborhood, some new set of circumstances, some new idea, some new fashion, some new cuisine fusion, some new thing somewhere around the corner that will engage my interest and attention and show that people I think Frank O'Hara said it best. It's something that shows that people don't entirely regret life. In terms of what I would say to a young poet starting out, I would say, do not be afraid of changing your mind about something you've written. That being inspired to write something and writing it down and then looking back at it an hour or two later and realizing, oh, this isn't nearly as interesting as I thought it was. That does not mean that you are without talent or without gift. That means that you are starting to put in the time and work that it takes. Because, I like what George Harrison said about this in a Beatles documentary. He said that when he joined the group, John Lennon and Paul McCartney had already written all of their terrible songs, and now they were writing some good ones. And so at first I had to write all my terrible songs so I could get to write some good ones. So I would say to this hypothetical young woman, just keep on writing and don't let judgments get in your way.
Very wise. And before Jennifer Clymer takes us home, David, Jim said a couple of things about your writing. Why don't you take a minute or two to say what you think about Jim's poetry?
Well, it's always just a great thrill to hear Jim read, but it's also a great thrill just to be around, Jim and Celeste, and to feel that, art is about being alive and bringing what's within you to be shared with the people around you. And It's one of the things that, for me, being in LA, being able to be around Jim, Celeste, all the great community of poets. Also, really, Harry, to be able to have your show. I mean, the people who listen to your show understand what an extraordinary community it is.
Well, thank you very much, David. We're pleased to have both of you, and we'd love to have you come back sometime if you're available. And Jennifer Clymer is the woman who makes all this happen along with the Creative Chaos team. So when you thank me, you're thanking Jennifer. And when you're thanking Jennifer and me, you're thanking MPTF, which is in its 101 year. So you're a blessing, and MPTF has a legacy. Go ahead, Jennifer.
I'm just doing what James does. This is your book, Love Poems to MPTF.
That's right.
So I wanted to showcase that as you were talking about MPTF.
Well, let me just finish by saying what I was going to finish was MPTF has a legacy of giving, and both of you poets have given a lot to us. You're always so generous with your poetry and your heart and your mind. And thank you very much, Jennifer Clymer.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Blessings to you.
It's a pleasure for all of us. And throughout the campus, everyone really loves this hour. So thank you both for being with us. And hopefully we see you back here again soon.
Yeah.
Absolutely.